Let's now see how we can create inheritance inside of our interface. We want to create area function with two different implementations with same pattern, and these two functions will be connected to our custom types. Next, we want to create another two functions with name system message, also with same pattern but with different implementation. These new functions will be connected to our custom types. We will create new interface space. Inside of our space interface, we have one specific method, area. This area doesn't have inputs, and we have one output as integer data type, which means that pattern of this method is exactly the same as our function, which is connected to our square and rectangle structures. So in this case, our space interface can be transformed into our square and rectangle structures. After this, we will create another interface, system interface. In our system interface, we have one method, system message. This method doesn't have inputs and outputs. This method have exactly the same pattern as our system message function, which is connected to our square and rectangle structure. So now we have two different interfaces which we can transform into our custom data types. For the last stage, we want to create third interface, but in this interface we won't create new methods. Instead of that, we will do something totally different. In our new interface, measurements, we didn't specify new methods. Instead of that, we specified names of our previous interfaces. What we achieved with these interfaces inside of our measurements interface will be embedded interface. So in this case, we have interface embedding another interface. In this kind of inheritance, we must know one thing. If we want to transform our measurements interface into one specific structure or custom data type, both of our interfaces must be satisfied. Because in this case, our measurements interface take all the methods from our inherited interfaces. Inside of our main function, we will create two new variables, s and r, with our square and rectangle custom data types. We will create new variable, measures, and that variable will be variadic slice of our measurements interface. Inside of our slice, we will specify two different objects, s and r variables. Our square and the rectangle data types can be assigned to our measurements interface because both of these variables satisfied all our methods inside of our measurements interface. That's why measurements interface can be transformed into our two variables. Now we can iterate over our variadic slice with for loop and the range function, and we can call for specific object inside of our variadic list specific function. We iterate over our measures variable, then we will target with our specific index place inside of our slice, and then each object inside of our slice will call implementation of area function which is connected to that specific object. In first case, that will be our s variable. So our s variable is square data type. So in first case, our measurements interface will be transformed to our square data type, and then that object will call implementation of area function. In second case, we have object r, which is rectangle data type. In this case, our measurements interface will be transformed to our rectangle data type, and that object then will call different implementation of our area function. So now we understood how we can create inheritance inside of our interface. We can also call our implementation for our system message function. Let's now see how we can put our specific interface inside of our structure. We will create two new functions with same name and same pattern, and both of these functions will be connected to our structures. This salary interface will have one method, monthly. This method have exactly the same pattern as our functions which are connected to our structures. Our salary interface can be transformed to our engineer and tester structures. For last stage, we will create a new structure, position, and we will put our salary interface inside of our position structure as our attribute. In position structure, first attribute will be interface as embedded attribute, and second attribute will be tasks as data type slice of strings. Let's now create in our main function practical example of this. We want to create new variable p1 with data type position with pointer. Our new variable p1 have two attributes. For first attribute, for our salary interface, we specified our e1 variable because our salary interface can be transformed to our engineer structure. For tasks, we specified slice of strings with specific values. When we print our p1 variable, output will look like this. We want to access our p1 variable, which has data type position, and we want to call monthly function for our p1 variable. We must explain how is this possible. We have problem because our position structure doesn't have own implementation of our monthly function. So how then our p1 variable can call our monthly function? We can see that we have salary interface as embedded attribute inside of our position structure, which means that this salary interface is automatically and directly promoted inside of our position structure. This means that our p1 variable with data type position immediately and directly inherited all methods from our embedded interface. So in this call, our p1 variable first check if there is any monthly function connected to us. We can see that we don't have that function connected to us. So then we explore our attributes. For our salary attribute, we have interface and we specified specific data type of engineer structure to our salary interface. Our embedded interface inside of our structure is smart because then he checks if that value which is assigned to our interface has monthly function. If that is true and condition is successful, then our p1 variable will access our e1 value inside of our salary interface, and then that object will call our monthly function. That's why our p1 variable can call monthly function and we can see the output of our implementation for our engineer structure. So basically, in final picture, our position structure tells us that we cannot directly call monthly function because there is no function like that connected to our position structure, but we can call monthly function from our inherited object from our embedded interface, which is first attribute inside of our position structure. Also, this monthly function call can be changed dynamically. We can specify another object to our salary interface inside of our p1 variable and we can get totally different implementation. Let's assign t1 variable to our salary attribute inside of our p1 variable. We assigned t1 variable to our salary attribute and we assigned new slice of strings with new values to our tasks attribute inside of our p1 variable. Now, when we print our p1 variable, we can see that we can change the form, the location, and the values for that specific p1 variable. In this case, when we call implementation of our monthly function, from our P1 variable, the output will be totally different. We assigned T1 variable to our salary interface. In this case, we also doesn't have monthly function connected to our P1 variable, which has data type position, but our T1 variable, which is assigned to our salary interface, has monthly function which is connected to our tester structure. So in this case, our P1 variable will act as our salary interface. Then that salary interface will be transformed to our T1 variable, and then that T1 variable with data type tester will call implementation of monthly function. So here, from one specific structure, we called one specific function and we get totally different output. Here, we understood how we can put interface inside of our structure and how that can be useful for us. In the next video, we will see how we can create structure in which we will put many different slices of our specific interfaces.